It's early December, and North Carolina Department of Transportation crews are assembled along Old Charlotte Road. Following reports of debris falling into the roadway, the decision is made to remove the century-old bridge. Before work begins, Bridge Maintenance Supervisor Robert Plyler gathers crew members, media, and others for a project overview.
Quick things for safety. Obviously, if you're down here where the track hose are, have your hard hats, glasses on. I think all the photographers and everybody else are going to be up there well out of the way. This is a hammer hoe, and when he starts hitting this thing, you can't have flying pieces of rock. Just understand that, so just be careful. Give or take how this thing was built, there's 2 I-beams in this. If this hammer hoe does what we think it's going to do, it'll come down center sections first, trying to get that open space and get the 2 beams out. There'll be a lot of back and forth between the track hoe and the hammer hoe. If you guys have any questions, we're all going to be up there too. And I think that's about it. Let's start it.
And just like that, the old bridge is gone. If you travel Old Charlotte, you've seen the property conditions. Nature has reclaimed many of the colonial revival-style structures. Invasive vegetation snakes up razor wire fencing, running parallel to no trespassing signs. Look closer, and you'll see vines hiding years of graffiti tagged on crumbling walls. The grounds serve as a symbol of decay and resilience. That duality has marked the Stonewall Jackson Training Facility for years. Regardless of your thoughts on the property, one thing is undeniable. It's a uniquely fascinating place. And soon, if all goes as planned, new life could be in store for the old property. I'm Dominique Clark, and on this episode of Did Y'all Hear?, we're exploring the evolution of the Stonewall Jackson property and uncovering what's next for the iconic site.
America thrives here.
It's always hard to know where to start with Stonewall Jackson.
That's former Deputy County Manager Jonathan Marshall. He's been involved in the property's redevelopment for several years. Even after his retirement from Cabarrus in 2022, he continued working as a consultant.
The state legislature passed a piece of legislation that started to transfer it to Cabarrus County, piece by piece. So I've been working on that, and it has been a long and arduous process. Starting the first transfer, I don't think a lot of people realize that Franklin Park and the soccer complex with it were just leased by the county. And we had already been working on a longer-term lease because the county has been making so many improvements there. But that was all part of the original farm of the Jackson Training School. So that was the first piece, the first domino that fell, is that leased property was transferred to Cabarrus County. Since then, we've also surveyed the entire parcel, and 2 more pieces, north and south of the large television communication tower, have both transferred to the county. And then the final piece is a 33-acre parcel that encompasses the historic campus itself, where the training school was located historically, where you see all those old buildings. That'll be the last one that transfers. When the state first passed the legislation that it was transferring to Cabarrus County, a lot of people thought it just was that simple, it transferred. It's been anything but simple, and I think the biggest thing to know is that the historic property has not transferred yet, but it will. And that process is still ongoing, and it is still our intent to preserve this site, to find some partners to preserve that history, preserve this site, because it isn't just important to Cabarrus County and to the Charlotte region, it's important to the state.
Cabarrus natives may know the story well, but if you're unfamiliar with how the facility came to be, here's Judge Clarence Horton from an episode of Capco TV's Historical Moments.
In 19th century North Carolina, as in most southern states of that era, young boys who were convicted of crimes received the same harsh sentences and punishments as adult offenders. They were either sent to the county jail or to the chain gang, or to the state's prison. In 1890, Jim Cook, then a resident of Concord and the founding editor of the local daily newspaper, The Standard, witnessed a sentence of 3 years and 6 months at hard labor on the Cabarrus County chain gang, handed out to a 13-year-old boy convicted of stealing. By Mr. Cook's account, the theft amounted to $1.30. Distressed at the sight of the lad taken from the courtroom, chained to a hardened adult criminal, Mr. Cook devoted the next 17 years to a campaign for the establishment of a training school for boys. He then spent the rest of his life working to ensure the success of that school. Mr. Cook worked hard through his newspaper, The Standard, and obtained clemency for the boy from the governor, and he began to try to accumulate support for his idea of a juvenile reformatory. The idea of a training school for young boys was a radical idea at the beginning of the 20th century, and supporters found the going very hard in a conservative legislature. They turned for help to the King's Daughters in North Carolina, a Christian service organization which was organized in 1886 in New York. The legislation passed on March 2nd, 1907, with an initial appropriation from the state of $10,000 spread over a 2-year period. The legislation establishing Stonewall Jackson School provided that at least 3 members of the North Carolina branch of the King's Daughters would be named trustees of the school. The King's Daughters were also given the privilege of turning the first ground at the groundbreaking for that historic first building. That first cottage, appropriately named for the King's Daughters, was completed by Christmas of 1908. First pupil arrived at the school on January 12, 1909, which was also Mr. Cook's 46th birthday. When Superintendent Thompson completed his term of service on December 1, 1913, there were 56 boys in residence at the school. The school was then situated on 300 acres of land. Charles E. Boger of Cabarrus County succeeded Mr. Thompson, serving for 29 years. When Mr. Boger retired in 1942, there were 17 cottages, an administration building, a trades building, laundry, bakery, infirmary, dairy, textile plant, ice plant, gymnasium, and 948 acres of land.
Back on Old Charlotte Road, local photographer Michael Anderson is documenting the bridge removal. Michael grew up in Cabarrus and remembers when Stonewall Jackson Training School was a working facility.
If you were a boy growing up in Cabarrus County, anytime you did anything wrong, you were definitely threatened with being sent to Jackson Training School. And you rode by the place a lot, especially coming from Harrisburg, because at that point in time, there was not much in Harrisburg. There was no grocery stores, there were nothing, so you had to come to Concord or go into Charlotte to just go to the grocery store. So you'd go down that road a lot. And back then, you'd see the boys outside playing basketball, walking, marching, whatever they were doing. You think of structures, or I think of structures in the community that have been around for so long. The first and foremost is the old courthouse, the old historic courthouse that's been around and is a symbol of our community. Then you think places like the Gym Theater has been very iconic because it's touched so many people's lives. Then you think of the bridge at Stonewall Jackson Training School. It's touched a lot of people's lives, indirectly or directly, and you see that, and it brings back a memory or a thought or something, depending on who you are and how it's touched you in your life. Well, when I first heard about it, I mean, it just broke my heart, because growing up in this county my entire life, you see things, you remember things bring back things of your childhood and the way it used to be around here, and you hate to see those things go. It's just like anywhere else in the world, for the most part. You don't want to see history just totally wiped out. To see some of the old parts of you almost. You have a personal connection with places and things around in the community. So many places in our community no longer exist because of decay or progress or repurposing, and it's a part of you. You feel connected to I feel connected to this community so deeply because I grew up here, and I've got all my memories of life and family and everything are here. I mean, you still got your memories, but you physically can't go to that place anymore. You physically can't see it, experience it, or anything. All you have is pictures. Luckily, I have a lot of those, so I can revisit my memories a lot, and a lot easier than some others, but it's a part of you that dies.
The fascination goes well beyond Cabarrus residents.
It is just an intriguing piece of property from the way it looks. People have seen it for years. Some people just wonder what it was. Some people know some of the history. There are state historic markers out there, but something about it is very intriguing to them.
I am Nolan Dahm. I'm the Programs and Exhibits Manager at the Charlotte Museum of History. A huge part of our mission, the reason we exist, is about historic preservation. And so I came up to the area, I'm just driving through, and all of a sudden I was met with the sign, Stonewall Jackson Institute, above that pedestrian bridge there, which is, the sign is no longer there. It was taken down like 3 days after I was here. But I saw that, and I literally pulled over my car, what? I knew there's a story here. A big sign about a Confederate general, and there's some old buildings, but it's a barbed wire. What is going on? And so I stopped, I Googled it for a sec, and I was like, there's something here. And so I just kept looking into it. First people I talked about was my staff. I think my reaction and most people's reaction was ooh, that's creepy. Old prison, what's going on there? But, then I started emailing folks here at the county, Historic Cabarrus. There's all sorts of organizations who are sort of involved. And, they linked me up with Jonathan Marshall, who, I mean, from the few times I've talked to him, just seems like he has a connection to that site, knows everything about it, and was very, very interested in just talking to me and hearing my thoughts as well.
I continue to be contacted by people who believe that who like to do paranormal studies there, who believe that there are ghosts, that again, when you talk to individuals or the family of individuals who are actually there, you hear both sides. One, that it was the best thing that ever happened to them. It set them on the right path. They got that training. And keep in mind, they taught them farming. They taught them how to manage food. They taught them, in many ways, family life. They had a printing press. They had machine shops, woodworking shops. The individuals there learned a lot of skills. At the same time, there are individuals who struggled there, whether it was at the hands of other students who were there, or sometimes it's attributed back to the house parents who were over the cottage. So you have to keep all those things in mind. There's good and bad. It's like any piece of history. There's two sides to it all, then there's a middle ground. So I think that a big part of this is that people lived there. People's lives were changed there. And I think, to me, when you're out there, you feel that. And to some folks, maybe that feels spooky. That feels like there's something paranormal going on. I will honestly say I have not experienced any of that, but I will tell you it's a very moving piece of property to be on. And that is such an intangible, I can't really explain why it is. But when you're standing there, you feel some of that. One of the things that you see when you're out there is there are some really old oak trees all throughout the property. You realize they're lined up because the main part of what you're seeing from Old Charlotte Road was kind of a parade area. And so you'll see pictures, and I really should credit the Cabarrus County Library System too, in that they have pulled a lot of this history together. They found old photographs. We think there's still more out there, and we'd like to find those. But you see some of these pictures, and you'll see that whole front area full of students in formation lined up between these oak trees. And you realize those oak trees were planted on purpose in a long line. It's, again, difficult to see because they're starting to fall down. In fact, one of them fell and hit Cannon Memorial even within the last year. But you go from those pictures of the historic campus to standing out there now, and you begin to, in your mind's eye, see what occurred on that property.
The structures aren't the only unique features of the property. Once again, here's Judge Horton from Historical Moments.
That land lay on the edge of what geologists sometimes call the Syenite Ring Dike. Seen from the air, the dike is a 22-mile circle of stones which have been a mystery for many years. Many geologists think they're the remains of prehistoric volcanic activity.
For the county as a whole, our Soil and Water Division has done a natural heritage inventory to identify those things in this county that are unique to the county. And those can be endangered species of plants and animals, or it can be geology. And in this case, you have two of those. One, the unique geology. You see all the stone coming out of the ground, or that is the ground. Some of it you can't even see. At the corner of Old Charlotte Road and 49, there is so much stone. It is stone stacked upon stone upon stone. It's not developable, which is good because it's natural. And as you go up Old Charlotte Road, you see that same rock outcropping, which people will tell you is the remnant of the intrusion of magma. There was an area where there was a fissure. Magma moved up, cooled, and that stone is the remainder of that. So that's very unique to Cabarrus County. Although you see it all over Cabarrus County, it's still unique in the geology. But then the other thing that's associated with that is a rare plant called Portulaca smalli, which people will know Portulaca as a plant of different varieties that they can put in their yard as an annual. But this particular one grows on the site in very unique conditions. It's where the rock is breaking down and water pools when it rains. So you won't see the plant at all. You'll get a period of rain and suddenly the plant will appear and bloom, disappear again, and then we'll get more rain and it'll come back out. And all those areas, when it's redeveloped, will have to be protected.
A state fencing project that slowed that final property transfer is now complete. Here's Assistant County Manager Kelly Sifford on what's next.
In January, we'll begin working with Preservation North Carolina to help us start identifying those individuals who, or corporations, or who, the various types of people that may take on a project like this. Most people are going to want to get in fairly quick if they can get the project started or get the property because it is in decline. It is hard to secure at this point. So I think they're going to want to move quickly, but how quickly between actually applying for your tax credits and, honestly, when you would actually be able to walk into whatever they're going to create out of it, whether that's businesses or, who knows what they're going to actually do with it. But I would foresee it being a long process, maybe some of them happening before others, depending on the condition.
What would be ideal use of the space? What would you like to see happen with this space once it's all said and done?
That is probably as open-ended as anything we've worked with on this property. To meet state law, it needs to transfer from the state to Cabarrus County, but it has to have, the historic part has to have historic covenants and restrictions on it to ensure that we're actually maintaining that property and preserving the history as best we can. The county will then transfer it to a nonprofit, Preservation North Carolina, who will add additional restrictions and covenants to it, and with the county will seek someone to redevelop and rehabilitate this property. We're really leaving it open-ended because it's going to be a very difficult piece of property to redevelop, especially meeting all those restrictions and covenants and preserving the history. So I think it's just very open-ended what may happen out there. You're going to see some of the older buildings that are just not able to be restored. They're just too far gone. Others, despite them looking too far gone, they can restore them. And you'll see some of those restored for other uses. But you'll also see some new buildings out there, I believe. And those will have to be built in keeping with the architecture of the campus.
The church is part of the transfer. It doesn't have a lot of parking, so it is kind of a difficult piece. It's, I think, going to be more of a one-off. I I had great visions for it being an art studio because it doesn't have much parking. It doesn't have much, there's no way to really create it. The property drops off pretty severely right behind the building. So it's very limited. So I think, other than, hopefully somebody maybe from the same party accessing it and providing parking on the opposite side and maybe doing a crosswalk or something where the actual footbridge was. I'm very excited to finally see it being hopefully renovated. I grew up here, so I've seen it my whole life. And, it's been a sad thing to watch the deterioration go on because those are very beautiful buildings. And so very excited to see it take on a new life and do something different.
Can you speak a little to the importance of preserving the history of this site?
This was the first reform school, training school. This was a change in attitude in how youthful offenders were treated. So it's important to remember that part of the history. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is the architecture. The state helped with the acquisition of the property. But in order to build those buildings, they had to work with nonprofits, again in the early 1900s, even to open it. And the buildings, the money for those was generated by the public and generated by the counties that were sending students to this campus. And they employed an architect named Louis Asbury, who's extremely well known in North Carolina architecture circles. And this is one of his primary pieces of work, I believe. So it's also important to preserve it from that architectural standpoint. So it's the history where we're looking at how important it was in the treatment of youth offenders, but it's also the architecture, and then finally that unique natural heritage.
History is important because nothing is new. That's where I come from. There's always some example you can base it on. It doesn't matter what your sort of political beliefs are. It doesn't matter what your goals are in life. Whatever you're doing is new. Uber changed the world, but it's also basically a taxi service. So yeah, nothing is new. There's always people who were on this land before you, going back 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. And so if you can make sure that you honor that stuff, I think, that's just better for everybody.
Whatever it is, just like anything else in this community, I want the positive. I want stuff that benefits everybody, not certain people, not certain groups, not certain areas. We can all enjoy this. We live in a really good community, in a really diverse community, and we've come a long way in the way we do things around here. And I want to continue to go in a positive way and use some of the old history and make it something positive for the future. But remember the past.
If you enjoyed this episode of Did Y'all Hear? Subscribe and give us a rating and a review wherever you're listening. We would appreciate it, y'all. You can watch the full Historical Moments episode by visiting youtube.com/Cabarrus County and searching Historical Moments. Stay updated on the Stonewall redevelopment and all county projects by visiting cabarruscounty.us/cabgo. That's CABGO. There you can connect with this podcast, our social media channels, the Cap Connect biweekly newsletter, and more. Thanks for listening.
America thrives here.